Compassion Plans, Episode 2, Running Over the Debt Monster.
The world we live in is far from perfect. How can I effectively make a difference? This is Compassion Plans, a weekly interview to help you make the world a better place with your host, Bentley Davis.
Welcome to Compassion Plans. I'm Bentley Davis. Today I have James Kinson from Cash Car Convert. Welcome to the show, James.
Hey, Bentley. Thanks for having me.
I'd like to start our conversation by discussing compassion, which is sometimes defined as easing someone else's pain. James, what pain are you easing?
Well, Bentley, I think that in this country, a lot of people are basically indentured servants to their cars and their car loans. So I'm about breaking the myth that people will have to have car loans their whole life. I'm about helping people in a way that some of them don't even realize they need at this point. But I believe it's pretty compassionate to help them out with that.
So you're helping people get a hold of their finances by how they buy cars?
Exactly. Basically, I feel like most people are sleepwalking through this. They don't realize that they have other options. They, much like I did early in my life, believe in this myth that you're always going to have car payments, right? I believed it for a long time. And I think now it's even worse with leases because those people have absolutely determined that they're never going to get off the payment wagon because at the end of their lease, they've got nothing left and they have to start from scratch. Even if people decide they want to keep their car payments, I just want to open their eyes to the fact that they're impacting their life in a very major way. And so I'm just trying to open their eyes to the opportunity to do something different.
Excellent. What's your plan to help people not always have a car payment?
Yeah. So one of the things is, first of all, I'm trying to open their eyes to just the fact that that they have this pain. Maybe they didn't know they had it. But once I do that, then I'm encouraging them to sell the car they have and buy something for cash. And so I try to help educate people about how to buy cars that start at under $5,000. I feel like most people can scrape together, somewhere between $3,000 and $5,000. I think most people don't have any idea that you can get a really solid vehicle that'll transport you from point A to point B pretty reliably within that price range. Especially people who've only bought new cars, only visited new car dealerships. They just automatically think that everything that would be at that $3,000 to $5,000 price point would just be absolute junk. That's just not the case. Now, is it going to be the sexiest, flashiest, latest gizmoed vehicle? Absolutely not. But will it get you reliably from point A to point B? Yeah, if you do your homework and your research, then absolutely. And I'll just say one more thing here real quick, and that is the less money you're paying for a vehicle, the more research you need to do because, chances are you don't have a lot of margin in your life. And so you need to make sure that you're making a good, wise choice with that vehicle because if you pay $3,000 or $5,000 for a vehicle and then you choose unwisely and you wind up with a, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 repair on a transmission or an engine, then you really didn't do yourself any favors. So I'm a firm believer in that you have to make good choices there. And I'm trying to help people tilt the scales in their favor where they can make better choices and be a little more educated about how to go after those low-end cars.
Yeah, that $3,000 is often what it would take to come up with a down payment for a car. So many people are used to coming up with that money.
Yeah, absolutely right. And one of the things I don't think people think about, and this is part of the education process, is that the average new car today costs $32,000. According to Edmunds.com, they have a depreciation calculator out there. The first year of depreciation is right at $7,800 for that car. So somebody in the first year of owning a $32,000 car just lost $7,800 of value. And that doesn't include the car payments that they made on average of $474 a month. So the first year between payments and depreciation, they're in about $13,000 to that vehicle. Yeah, it's amazing how much money people put out every year, especially that first year, because they didn't recognize the loss on the depreciation that first year. They don't recognize it, but those are real dollars going out the door for a working family.
Yeah. My wife and I have both paid off our cars and plan on keeping it that way. We were able to buy our most recent car with cash. It was such a release to not have a car payment and really never have one again. That has allowed us to try different things we couldn't have done before, like this podcast.
You're right about that. I went through life event back in the late 90s where I had a Lexus LS400, and it was pretty old at the time, but I still had payments on it. I got to the point where I needed to sell that car, and circumstances didn't allow me to do it. So I was stuck in a vehicle that was really painful for me to make the payments on. And when I got out of it, a friend of mine pointed me to a $2,000 Saab that a friend of his was selling. That car had been maintained by a Saab dealer, or excuse me, a specialty mechanic that worked on Saabs. And so I bought that car for $2,000, sold my Lexus, and man, I felt so much smarter than I did the day before when I was driving that cash car. You know, this car was clean and neat. Engine ran very well in it getting me from point A to point B. It did have some quirky things about electronics, and I think that's maybe something that Saabs are kind of known for. But boy, in terms of transportation, getting me from point A to point B, it was rock solid, and I got a good couple of years out of that car. Yeah, it was a real blessing to me.
So you had that great experience and feeling of wisdom. How did you move from that to helping other people find that same feeling? Was that when you got the inspiration?
Well, no, it actually wasn't, interestingly enough. You know, I remembered feeling that way and feeling, empowered with it. But then when it came time to get another vehicle, I hadn't done anything to prepare for it. So when that vehicle was ready to leave me and I wanted to get something newer and nicer, I went out and bought another car using debt. Now, I didn't go in over my head kind of debt. I had this kind of a weird thing where I was like, I don't want to make a car payment over $300 a month. And so, my car payment, I got it down around $200 a month by putting a fair amount down on it and so forth. But nonetheless, I went right back into payments. So I had payments from that, basically 1999 time frame up to about 2009. And that's when I had the event that changed me. And what happened is I read Dave Ramsey's Total Money Makeover. I also read another book, Larry Winget's You're Broke Because You Want to Be. And I loved both those books. So Dave kind of told me how I really got serious about getting out of debt. My wife and I were about $70,000 in debt at that time for unsecured debt. We had car payments of right at about $500 a month on our two vehicles, and that's combined payments. We got those paid off. We paid off all the debt, and we've been living, buying cash cars since then, since we both have bought cars since 2009. I think I bought mine in 2010. She bought hers in like 2011, and we bought those with cash and have been just, really thrilled with them and have had really good luck with that. But it was the Dave Ramsey book that really got me going. The thing that got me trying to help others, which is, kind of where your question was really aimed at, is that I started getting into everything Dave Ramsey did. I started listening to his radio show, his everything that he did. And I got this reoccurring theme from him where he would tell people to sell the car and buy a beater. Sell the car and buy a beater. And then he would say, sometimes I feel like my radio show is the sell the car show, because he was telling people all the time they need to sell their car. And I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, I know how to buy cars. I've never traded in a car. I've always bought and sold cars, on my own. And I'm like, I've never worked in the auto industry, but I know how to do this as an individual. I started thinking about the fact that he doesn't teach people how to buy those beaters. And as I stated earlier, if you buy an inexpensive car and you're loaded with debt and don't have any margin in your life and you have a big repair come, that's not very much of a blessing. So I wanted to go about educating people with a few techniques and things that I do. And most of it's common sense, by the way. It's not rocket science or something the average person can't do. It's just being a little more aware of your environment and being a little more intentional with your choices. And then, I think most people can find a good quality car, as long as they get their ego out of the way and don't feel like they have to drive the flashiest, nicest thing out there.
Excellent. So you take the philosophy of Dave Ramsey and Larry Winget and add specific tools and tactics to walk us through getting it all done. While doing this, are there any lessons you've learned the hard way that you can share with us so we can avoid them?
Well, most of my lessons I've learned when I myself was buying cars through the 40 years I've been doing that. And I'll relay, I guess, a couple of those. One of them, when I was 21 years old, I bought a car that cost about $8,300. And at the time, I was making about $8,500 a year myself. And to put that in perspective, I think in today's dollars, that would be like a $35,000 car. So I owned that car for about 2.5 years. and I bought it for about $8,400. And when I sold it, I think I got about $3,800 for it. So I lost more than half the value of that vehicle in 2 years. I was glad for it to go when it went. I've never for myself purchased another new car in all my life. All my other cars have been used, and I've been pretty happy with doing it that way. Not that I wouldn't love to have a new car, but it just doesn't make sense based on the depreciation. I'm not in a place where I want to give up that much of my money in depreciation. The next worst thing that happened to me is I bought a car thinking I was buying it from an individual and found out this guy was actually a front for a dealership. And this dealership rolled back the miles on their vehicles. And so like 6 months after I bought this car, I saw this guy on the news with one of these, scam buster kind of a news programs. And I had all kinds of trouble with that car. I had to replace have the engine rebuilt, transmission rebuilt, brakes redone. And I mean like brake system. And the AC unit had to have a major repair. I spent a lot of money on that vehicle. So that was a very expensive lesson I learned. One of the ways I tell people to protect themselves is when you find a car that you like and you've looked at it and you've done your inspection, spend a little money and take it to a mechanic. Spend $100 or $200, take it to a mechanic and let them look at it and tell you what they think of it. And it's better if you have a personal mechanic. If you don't, you should get one. But even if you don't have one, you should definitely find a local mechanic and take that vehicle and have them look at it for you.
That's some great advice. Do you help people out exclusively through your blog and podcast?
Yeah, right now it's my blog and my podcast. I'm planning to have an ebook that I'm going to release in the next 60 days. I'm also planning to do some online webinars, but I think those will start off. I'm going to try to do some local things in my neighborhood, maybe at my local library, offer some free classes as a way to get some feedback on my material and see how I need to tweak it before I offer it to a broader audience, in a webinar kind of a format. But yeah, right now, my blog and my podcast, and really, since I started my podcast in December, I haven't really done any blog posts that other than just show notes for my podcast.
So far, do you have any success stories where you've affected someone else's life?
Yeah, I've had a couple, actually. And one is I had a gentleman reach out to me, and he had a 2006 Jetta that he started off the email by saying, "I love this car." He said, "But it's about to turn over to 100,000 miles, and I'm concerned that I'm going to start having problems." And this car was paid for, and he and his wife both loved it. And he said, "I think I want to go buy a car with a 10-year warranty. What do you think?" So I took him through the numbers and basically told him that, a new car is going to cost you $32,000. You're going to lose $7,800 the first year. You're going to have payments of about another $5,600 the first year. For $13,000, you can do a lot of repairs to that Jetta. So I said, what I recommend you do is take that car down to a mechanic and have them look at it and tell you if there's any impending issues with it that they can see. And if they're minor enough, then go ahead and get them fixed. You've got a reliable vehicle. And then, since you've already in your mind decided you're going to make car payments, start making those car payments to yourself right now. And then when you do get ready to get rid of your Jetta, then you can use that money to buy your next vehicle for cash, and you won't have to go in debt and make car payments. And I also told him that most cars today, and you go out on Craigslist and look at vehicles, you'll find all kind of vehicles that are over 200,000 miles. So I told him there's no reason his vehicle with proper maintenance won't go to 250. And he came back to me with an email and said, you're absolutely right. I didn't think of it that way. So I took it down. My mechanic said there's no problems with it, and I have been maintaining it well. So I'm going to start making payments to myself, and I'm going to try to get 250,000 miles out of this vehicle. So that's one story that I was very happy with. I had another gentleman, and this is one I get fairly often, is that people will tell me they were thinking about buying a new car, and then they listen to my show, and they said, I didn't know I needed this education until I heard it. And then they're like, I'm not going to buy a new car. And as I tell people, look, I want you to buy a cash car so you can really have the kind of freedom that you deserve. But even if you're not going to do that, at least downsize. Like if you got a $32,000 car, downsize to like a $16,000 car. At least get that started. There's so many good cars out there in that price range. You won't have a problem. And then eventually, hopefully, you'll be able to save money and buy a cash car. But, at least make those incremental improvements to kind of put some of that money back in your own pocket.
So how long have you been doing the blog and podcast?
Yeah, I started the blog in August of 2013. just a couple of months away here from having been doing that for a year. And I started the podcast in December. It's been kind of a heady ride. I've really met a lot of good people this way through the podcast and through my audience. I've had a lot of good support. I should tell you, Bentley, that when I started doing this, one of the things that people will tell you when you start a kind of an online presence, you should go see if somebody else is doing it. And if they are, that's a good sign because that means there's a business there. Well, I went out and I couldn't find anybody else doing what I'm doing. I was very concerned that I wasn't doing something that was going to be of value to people. But as I've met people and talked to people, I've had such a positive reaction, especially the people who are business owners and people who want to change their lives and they don't want to work a 9-to-5 job. They want to make that leap into starting their own business. And they realize that any kind of debt really holds you back. It's kind of a ball and chain to prevent you from being able to live your dreams. So I think I started off kind of not being very bold about telling people about this. And I had a particular podcaster, his name's Ray Edwards, a guy I respect immensely. And I was telling him about what I was doing. And he said, you should be more bold about this. He said, the fact is, if people will do what you're telling them, there will be people who will retire in dignity because of what you're doing. There are people who will be able to put their children through college because of what you're doing. Don't just think what you're doing doesn't matter or isn't important. This is a message that needs to be out there. I've had a number of people tell me similar kinds of things, and it really changed my mindset about it and allowed me to kind of walk a little taller and hold my head a little higher when I'm talking about this now.
Definitely. You should feel free to share this with people. So you've been doing this for about a year now. Do you feel like you're making the world a better place?
I do, in terms of impacting people. Like I said, I get messages from people and stories from people that have been impacted. I talked to my wife about it and I'm just like, wow, it's like I'm doing this thing and I dreamed of doing it, but I'm still amazed every time I get a story from somebody telling me that they did something that changed their life, that they didn't go in debt for a car, or they kept a car that they thought they were going to get rid of, and then they took it to a mechanic and had somebody look at it and found out that really there wasn't much of anything wrong with it, and now they're going to be able to drive it a lot longer. And there's a thing a friend of mine, Jim Munchback, says he's made a lot of money off of people with the 100,000 mile myth, and that is the myth that once a car flips over 100,000 miles, you better get rid of it. He's done okay buying cars from people who were anxious to sell when they were about to hit that point. So yeah, I feel really good about that, and I think I've already impacted a number of people. I'm looking forward to continuing to grow my brand and my reach and impacting more people as I grow.
Well, we look forward to seeing you do that and helping where we can. If you met someone that had a similar compassion to share useful information for making the world a better place, what advice would you give them?
I would really tell them just, they need to do their research, but they really need to choose themselves and start. I had this idea or some semblance of this idea for about 8 months before I ever started the blog. And I kept having all these excuses for not starting. I don't know how many more people would have been impacted had I started sooner. It's so easy to get negative on yourself and you start thinking, well, who am I to help people in this particular way? Who's going to listen to me? And we all have those kinds of doubts that'll creep in. And I think the thing that really helped me kind of get over that is I realized that I don't have to be an expert in all facets of vehicles to be able to help a lot of people. I just have to be able to help people who aren't quite as far along as I am. They can learn from my mistakes, and I can share with them the knowledge that I've earned through some costly mistakes, and I can share those with people, and so that's what I would say to them. Take stock and inventory of what it is they have to offer in the space that they're looking to get into, and just realize they don't have to be the expert. They just have to be a couple of steps ahead of the person that they're trying to help.
Yes, that's so important to understand that we don't have to know everything before we start. Are there any tools, resources, or processes that you use that might help us do something similar?
There's not, I don't do anything too exclusively. I think the thing I would recommend to people is to get engaged with people in the online marketing space. If that's where your interests are, then engage on Twitter, engage on Facebook, start following some of your heroes in the podcasting or blogging space, and start interacting with them. Start tweeting to them and sharing their content. And it's amazing. Those people really appreciate that, and they will tweet you back. It gives you some social credibility out in your space. And then I'm a big believer in going to conferences and meetups. I think that's the other thing is you have to let people know what you're doing. And so go out there to conferences and meetups and meet as many people as you can. Take those online relationships that are all social and take them offline to the meetups and conferences. I think that's a really good thing. Now, as it relates to my space in particular for the cash cars, I'm a big believer in using things like Consumer Reports, Edmunds, and Kelley Blue Book, Auto Trader. There's lots of information out there, lots of tools that can help people get educated about the cars they're looking at. So I really encourage people to do that for those who might be interested in taking a look at a less expensive car.
Those are some great resources for the auto world. And I agree that it's so important to understand that we don't have to know everything before we start. The Compassion Plans audience enjoys supporting each other and guests from the show. What are 2 ways we can help you help people get out of car debt?
I think the biggest thing anybody could do to help me right now is to help me get my brand out there. So subscribing to my podcast and leaving a rating and review, those 2 things will get me a higher rating and a higher traffic position in iTunes, and therefore more people will be able to see my content. And I think I've had so many people say it, I mentioned it earlier, but so many people tell me, I didn't know I needed your message until I heard it. Well, if nobody sees my artwork and my logo, then nobody has an opportunity to click on me and listen. So doing that and helping me get more brand awareness within iTunes, it would be fantastic.
You heard him. Let's spread the word so James can help more people. The links will be in the show notes for this podcast, or you can go to cashcarconvert.com. And James, if they have a friend that's about to buy a car, they should tell them to check out cashcarconvert.com first?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, and I even have a special link for the iTunes subscriptions and ratings and reviews. They can go to cashcarconvert.com/iTunes, and that'll take them straight there.
Well, James, I really appreciate your time and for sharing how you took action on your compassion by helping people get control of their finances through how they buy cars.
Thank you, Bentley. I really appreciate it. Appreciate what you're doing as well. I do think that there's not enough compassion in this world, so I think that's a really important topic, and I appreciate you taking it on.
And listeners, thanks for joining us. Get the links and notes for today's show at compassionplans.com/2. Never miss an episode by entering your email into our subscription list while you're there. If you appreciate what we're doing, go to compassionplans.com/appreciate to find out how you can spread compassion, like rating and reviewing this podcast on iTunes. Thank you so much for caring.